The quantum resonance scanner hummed with an unusual frequency, its delicate crystalline sensors parsing data that defied the luminary's understanding. Technician Vornak's tertiary neural cluster trembled, a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing unease rippling through his telepathic nodes. The incoming vessel was nothing like the countless primitive craft they had encountered throughout their galactic dominion. Its design spoke of a chaos that challenged everything the luminary considered elegant and precise. Sharp angular lines cut against smooth hull plating, adaptive metamaterials that seemed to shift and breathe with an almost organic complexity. No standard propulsion signatures, no predictable energy emissions, just something else. Deep within the Celestial Concordance's primary observation chamber, holographic displays cascaded with fractalized data streams. Centuries of accumulated synological information scrolled past, each comparison algorithm returning the same puzzling result. Inconclusive. The ship did not match any known technological paradigm in the luminary's vast archives. High-Archon Zelrak's contemplation chamber vibrated with suppressed tension. His neural tendrils, typically a calm weave of platinum-like telepathic strands, now flickered with erratic pulses. Something about this incoming vessel violated the fundamental laws of galactic hierarchy that had remained unchallenged for millennia. Analyze the quantum signature again, he commanded the junior researchers, his mental voice a razor-sharp directive that brooked no hesitation. The junior technicians, young luminaries still learning the intricate dance of telepathic research, scrambled to comply. Their neural interfaces connected seamlessly with the most advanced scanning arrays in known space, probing, measuring, dissecting every quantum fluctuation of the approaching craft. What they found defied explanation. The human vessel's hull exhibited quantum entanglement properties that should have been theoretically impossible. Its energy systems seemed to draw power from multiple dimensional states simultaneously, creating a power generation model that made the luminary's most advanced reactors look like primitive chemical batteries. More disturbing was the vessel's computational architecture. Traditional luminary technology relied on telepathically guided quantum processing, a system where thought and computation merged seamlessly. This human craft displayed something entirely different. A pure, machine-based intelligence that operated with a logic so alien, so fundamentally removed from telepathic influence, that it bordered on the incomprehensible. Vornak's tertiary neural cluster began to overheat. The data was not just unusual, it was fundamentally challenging everything the luminary understood about technological development. Each scan revealed layers of complexity that seemed to emerge from some unknowable design philosophy. The ship's exterior was itself a marvel of engineering. Adaptive metamaterials that could redistribute structural integrity instantaneously, heat dissipation systems that worked through principles the luminary had never conceived, sensor arrays that seemed to predict spatial interactions before they occurred. It's as if they'd weaponized uncertainty itself, Vornak muttered, his mental voice carrying a tone of reluctant admiration. High-Archon Zelrak caught the errant thought. For a moment, he considered mentally disciplining the young technician for such an undisciplined observation. But something stopped him. Something in the data was gnawing at the edges of his considerable intellect. The incoming vessel was now close enough for visual confirmation. Its scale was modest, certainly not impressive by luminary standards. No massive energy projectors, no planet-breaking weapon arrays. Just a ship. A small, seemingly unremarkable craft that moved with a fluidity that suggested something beyond mere technological sophistication. Prepare communication protocols, Zelrak commanded. We shall offer them the standard assimilation invitation. But even as he spoke, a microscopic part of his consciousness knew something was different. Something was changing. The age of luminary supremacy was about to encounter its first true challenge. And neither the humans nor the luminary fully understood what was about to unfold. Inside the Defiance's neural interface chamber, Dr. Michael Chen worked with a surgeon's precision, his fingers dancing across holographic control systems that pulsed with an almost living light. Around him, A team of specialists from Earth's most advanced neural research centers monitored systems that represented humanity's most closely guarded technological secret. The chamber itself was a marvel of bioengineered design. Grown from synthetic neural networks developed in the harsh research stations of Europa's underground laboratories, the ship's cognitive interface was part machine, part living organism. Each wall seemed to breathe, adaptive membranes that could reconfigure themselves milliseconds faster than any known computational system. Incoming psychic pressure detected, the ship's AI announced, its voice a perfect modulation of calm and analytical precision, initiating adaptive resonance protocols. What the luminary didn't understand was the true nature of humanity's neural defense. This wasn't simply a shield. It was a complex, living system that had evolved through generations of human struggle against mental manipulation. The story of this technology began decades earlier, in the aftermath of the great cognitive wars that had nearly destroyed human civilization. Massive neural network attacks had devastated entire continents, leaving millions with shattered minds. From that crucible of survival, humanity had developed something far beyond a mere defensive technology. Dr. Chen's great-grandmother had been one of the original researchers. Her work, begun in the radioactive ruins of what was once Silicon Valley, had started as a desperate attempt to protect human consciousness from total electronic warfare. The neural firewall was born from human resilience, a technological immune system that didn't just block attacks but learned from them. Each telepathic probe from the luminary was immediately analyzed, deconstructed, and integrated into the ship's adaptive systems. Where traditional defenses would simply block, the Defiance's neural interface began to understand, to predict, to counter. Lieutenant Aisha Nyong'o monitored the incoming psychic assault with a combination of scientific detachment and barely contained excitement. Her fingers moved across holographic interfaces, each gesture capturing and analyzing the luminary's telepathic techniques. "It's beautiful," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "They're trying to break through like water trying to penetrate a quantum-locked membrane." The ship's neural interface began to do something unexpected. It didn't just defend, it began to push back. Microscopic quantum entanglement nodes, developed in the most classified research facilities on Mars, started to generate counter-frequencies. These weren't simple electronic signals, but complex quantum resonances that could theoretically interact with the very fabric of telepathic communication. High in the observation deck, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the developing interaction with a strategist's careful eye. She understood something the luminary had yet to comprehend. This wasn't just a technological encounter. It was a fundamental clash of evolutionary strategies. Humanity's neural defense was more than a technology. It was a living, adaptive organism that represented centuries of survival against seemingly insurmountable odds. The luminary's telepathic assault began to fragment. Where they expected submission, they encountered something far more terrifying. A consciousness that didn't just resist, but actively studied and responded to their attack. Vornak, still monitoring from the luminary flagship, watched in growing horror as their most sophisticated mental weapons simply dissolved. It was as if the human vessel was consuming their telepathic energy, breaking it down, understanding it at a fundamental level. "This is impossible," he transmitted mentally to the higher command structures. "They're not just blocking. They're learning." Inside the Defiance's neural interface chamber, Dr. Chen allowed himself a slight smile. Humanity had spent generations preparing for this moment, a moment when their survival would depend not on brute force, but on the ability to adapt, to learn, to transform. The first true test of humanity's evolutionary strategy was about to begin, and the luminary had no idea what was coming. The void between stars erupted with a symphony of destruction that no galactic civilization had ever witnessed before. Luminary battle formations, perfect geometric patterns honed through millennia of uncontested warfare, began to disintegrate the moment they engaged the human vessel. Their tactical algorithms, which had subjugated countless species, suddenly found themselves confronting a combat system that operated on principles completely alien to their understanding. Commander Zara Kovalenko, the Defiance's tactical operations officer, moved with a predatory grace that belied the complexity of her work. Her neural interface was a living extension of the ship's combat systems, a hybrid of human intuition and machine precision that transformed warfare into something closer to an improvised dance. Incoming dimensional disruption torpedoes, the ship's AI announced. Adaptive countermeasures engaging. What happened next would be studied by military strategists for generations. The luminary weapons, each a marvel of psychically guided destruction, capable of unraveling molecular bonds, approached the Defiance with murderous intent. Quantum targeting systems locked on, dimensional resonance fields primed to tear the human vessel apart at the atomic level. But the human response was something entirely unexpected. Instead of simple evasion or direct confrontation, the Defiance began to manipulate the very physics of the combat space. Quantum entanglement nodes scattered throughout its hull began to interact with the incoming weapons in ways that defied conventional understanding. Torpedoes found themselves subtly redirected, their destructive potential transformed and dissipated. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, the ship's quantum warfare specialist, watched holographic displays that looked more like abstract art than traditional combat tracking. Each incoming weapon became a complex mathematical problem to be solved, a puzzle of energy and momentum to be carefully dismantled. "They're using psychic guidance," he muttered, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "But they've never encountered adaptive quantum interference." The Luminary Squadron Commander, Arch-Strategist Keltorn, watched in mounting horror. His fleet, a perfectly synchronized mechanism of destruction that had crushed civilizations for centuries, was being systematically dismantled without a single direct hit. It wasn't just that the human vessel was avoiding damage. It was actively transforming the nature of the conflict itself. Quantum-locked targeting systems on the Defiance didn't just track enemy vessels. They predicted and manipulated potential combat outcomes with a complexity that bordered on prescience. Each luminary attack was not just defended against, but fundamentally altered, its energy redirected, its potential for destruction neutralized. "This is impossible," Keltorn transmitted across the fleet's neural network. "They're rewriting the physics of combat in real time." The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything the Luminary had ever encountered. Where luminary combat relied on telepathic coordination and predetermined tactical matrices, the Defiance operated on something closer to pure adaptive intelligence. Zara Kovalenko's combat interface was a living ecosystem of predictive algorithms. Developed in the harsh training grounds of human deep space military academies, it represented generations of evolutionary adaptation. Each microsecond saw millions of potential combat scenarios analyzed, potential outcomes calculated and discarded faster than thought. The Luminary fleet began to break formation. Their perfect geometric patterns, once the hallmark of their military superiority, became a liability. Where they expected unified action, they found themselves facing an opponent that could attack each vessel as a unique individual threat. "Redirect energy from tertiary quantum resonance banks," Kovalenko commanded. The ship responded instantaneously, quantum systems realigning with a fluidity that made mechanical movement look primitive. Another wave of luminary weapons approached. Another wave would be systematically neutralized. What the Luminary didn't understand, what they could not yet comprehend, was that this was more than a battle. This was a fundamental challenge to everything they understood about warfare, about technology, about the very nature of conflict itself. Humanity had not just developed a new way of fighting, they had reimagined the entire concept of combat. And the Luminary were about to learn that lesson in the most brutal way possible. The collapse of myth is always loudest in the moments of silence. In the vast communication networks of the Celestial Concordance, whispers began to spread like a quantum virus. Each transmission carried something unprecedented: doubt. The carefully constructed narrative of luminary supremacy, a belief system that had governed galactic civilization for millennia, started to unravel with terrifying speed. On the communication hub of Nexus Prime, a massive data processing center that served as the neural nexus of luminary communication. Senior data archaeologist Limra watched in growing horror. Centuries of carefully curated historical records began to shift, recontextualized by the emerging data from the human encounter. The Concordance's archival systems were more than simple data storage. They were living memory banks, psychically maintained and curated by generations of luminary scholars. These archives had always been the ultimate proof of their civilization's superiority. Now they became a weapon of their own destruction. Each transmission from the battle zones carried fragments that challenged everything the luminary believed about themselves. Sensor logs, combat recordings, unfiltered data that showed their supposedly invincible fleet being systematically dismantled by a single human vessel. "It's not just a defeat," Limra muttered, her neural tendrils trembling. "It's a complete paradigm collapse." On the subjugated worlds within the Concordance, something else was happening. Colonies that had existed under luminary rule for generations began to sense a fundamental shift. The telepathic suppression fields that had maintained social control for centuries started to flicker, to weaken. The planet Corvash was typical of these worlds. A mining colony that had been under luminary control for over 7 centuries, its inhabitants had long been conditioned to accept their place in the galactic hierarchy. Telepathic limitation fields had kept the native population docile, their aspirations carefully managed and controlled. But something was changing. In the deep mining tunnels, where generations of workers had toiled under telepathic compulsion, conversations began to emerge. Whispers of resistance, fragments of hope that had been systematically suppressed for centuries now found room to breathe. Kaidlon, a mid-level mining supervisor who had never known anything but luminary rule, found himself experiencing something entirely new: independent thought. The telepathic conditioning that had guided his every decision for his entire life was losing its grip. "Something is different," he said to his work team, the words feeling foreign and exciting. "We don't have to accept this anymore." Back in the luminary communication centers, the data analysis became increasingly frantic. Junior researchers, their neural interfaces working overtime, discovered something that sent shockwaves through the entire Concordance leadership. The human vessel wasn't just a technological anomaly. It represented a fundamental challenge to the luminaries' entire understanding of evolutionary development. Their most advanced sinological research teams began to compile a terrifying profile. Humanity hadn't just developed technology. They had developed the entire approach to existence that the luminary had never encountered. A civilization that saw limitations as challenges to be overcome, that transformed every constraint into an opportunity for innovation. High Archon Zelrak received the initial reports in his private contemplation chamber. The holographic displays flickered with data that seemed to mock everything he understood about galactic civilization. Adaptive technologies that rewrote themselves in real time. Combat systems that learned and evolved faster than any known intelligence. Communication networks that existed in multiple states simultaneously. This wasn't just a technological challenge. This was an entirely different way of understanding existence itself. The first cracks in the luminaries' galactic hegemony weren't caused by weapons. They were caused by information, by the sudden, terrifying realization that everything they believed about their place in the universe might be fundamentally wrong. On 1,000 worlds, in countless communication networks, the whispers continued to spread. The myth was crumbling, and nothing would ever be the same again. The luminaries' response was a desperate symphony of technological desperation. Deep within the quantum forges of their most secure research facility, the Concordance's top weapon designers began activating systems that had remained dormant for centuries. These were not mere weapons, but existential technologies. Computational matrices so complex they bordered on sentient, weapons systems that could theoretically unravel the fundamental fabric of space-time. Dr. Rentok, chief architect of the Celestial Weapon Division, interfaced directly with the primary cognitive array. Holographic projections danced around him, each representing a potential apocalyptic scenario designed to neutralize the human threat. dimensional disruption cannons, quantum entanglement warheads, psychic dissolution fields that could theoretically unmake the neural connections of entire species. Activate the Void Breaker protocol. He transmitted mentally, his neural tendrils crackling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. What emerged was nothing short of a technological nightmare. The Void Breaker was more than a weapon. It was a computational ecosystem designed to predict and neutralize any technological threat. Developed during the Luminaries' most paranoid period of galactic expansion, it represented the absolute pinnacle of their defensive capabilities. Massive energy collectors began to draw power from multiple star systems. Quantum resonance chambers powered up, their energy signatures visible even from neighboring galaxies. The weapon was so massive, so fundamentally complex, that its mere activation caused gravitational distortions that could be detected light years away. But humanity had been preparing for something like this far longer than the Luminary could imagine. Aboard the Defiance, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the incoming threat with a calm that belied the magnitude of the situation. Her neural interface was already analyzing the weapon's computational structure, breaking down its potential attack vectors faster than the Luminary could conceive. Adaptive countermeasures, she murmured. Full quantum interference protocol. What happened next would become the stuff of galactic legend. The Void Breaker, a weapon designed to dissolve entire technological civilizations, found itself confronted with a defense system that was less a shield and more a living, evolving intelligence. Where the Luminary expected total destruction, they encountered something entirely unexpected. The human response wasn't about stopping the weapon. It was about understanding it. Quantum entanglement nodes scattered throughout the Defiance began to interact with the incoming weapon in ways that defied conventional physics. Each attack vector was not just blocked but analyzed, its fundamental computational structure dismantled and studied in real time. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, no relation to the captain, but equally brilliant, managed the computational defense. His interface was a living ecosystem of predictive algorithms, developed in the most classified research facilities of human space. Each microsecond saw millions of potential defensive scenarios calculated and discarded. They're using a recursive computational matrix, he announced to the bridge crew. Fascinating. It's like they're trying to solve a problem by throwing increasingly larger hammers at it. The Luminary weapon began to break down, not through direct destruction, but through a process of computational deconstruction so precise it was almost surgical. The Void Breaker found its own computational systems being analyzed, understood, and ultimately neutralized. Dr. Michael Chen watched the interaction with scientific detachment. This was more than a battle. This was a fundamental clash of technological philosophies. The Luminary approached technology as a form of control. Humanity saw it as a method of understanding, of adaptation, of survival. As the Void Breaker systems began to collapse, something remarkable happened. The human technological response didn't just defend, it began to learn. Complex algorithms started to extract and understand the Luminary weapon's fundamental design principles, turning a potential apocalyptic threat into the most valuable piece of technological research in galactic history. Arch-strategist Keltorn, monitoring from the Luminary Command Center, could only watch in mounting horror. This wasn't just a defeat. This was a complete deconstruction of everything the Luminary believed about technological superiority. The myth of their invincibility was crumbling, and humanity was rewriting the rules of existence itself. The infiltration of the Luminary homeworld was nothing like a traditional military operation. It was a surgical strike of information and perception. Commander Jack Harper moved through the sacred temple complex with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. His team wasn't just a special forces unit. They were technological shamans, each member a specialist in psychological warfare, computational deconstruction, and cultural subversion. The Luminary's most sacred space was a marvel of telepathic architecture, crystalline structures that seemed to breathe with collective consciousness, neural network pathways that transcended traditional technological understanding. Generations of Luminary had considered this place inviolable, a living testament to their supposed divine nature. They were about to learn otherwise. Dr. Aria Chen, the mission's primary xenopsychological analyst, understood something fundamental that the luminary had forgotten. Culture is nothing more than a complex information system, and all information systems can be decoded, analyzed, and ultimately transformed. Target is the central neural nexus, she transmitted to Harper. We're not here to destroy. We're here to expose. Their approach was multifaceted. Traditional military infiltration would have triggered immediate defensive protocols. Instead, they used something far more sophisticated. A combination of quantum information disruption, adaptive computational camouflage, and targeted psychological exposure. The first layer of their assault was informational. Quantum entanglement transmitters began to leak carefully curated historical data directly into the luminaries' neural networks. Centuries of suppressed histories from conquered civilizations, unfiltered records of luminary atrocities, scientific evidence that systematically dismantled their claims of divine superiority. It wasn't an invasion. It was an awakening. In the central chamber, holographic displays began to shift. Records that had been carefully maintained for millennia started to transform. The luminaries' own archival systems became the primary vector of their cultural destruction. High Archon Zelrak found himself experiencing something entirely foreign: doubt. The neural interface of the sacred temple, once a perfect mechanism of control and collective consciousness, began to fragment. Each piece of exposed information was like a quantum virus, rewriting the fundamental narrative that had sustained luminary civilization for generations. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez managed the computational side of the infiltration. His neural interface was a living ecosystem of adaptive algorithms, breaking down the luminaries' computational defenses, not through brute force, but through fundamental understanding. Their entire cultural system is a computational closed loop, he observed to Commander Harper. We're not destroying it. We're introducing external variables that the system cannot reconcile. The most devastating weapon was truth. Holographic displays throughout the temple began to show unfiltered historical records. The luminaries saw themselves not as divine beings, but as a species that had built its entire civilization on systematic oppression. Conquered worlds, destroyed cultures, civilizations reduced to nothing more than resource extraction systems. Their own archives became their judgment. Vornak, the junior researcher who had first observed the human vessel, watched in growing horror. The sacred temple, the very heart of luminary belief, was being dismantled not through violence, but through pure, unfiltered information. This is impossible, he transmitted mentally. But even as he thought it, he knew the truth was something else entirely. Commander Harper understood the true nature of their mission. This wasn't about military victory. This was about breaking the cycle of oppression that had lasted millennia. We're not conquerors, he transmitted to his team. We're liberators. The final blow was both simple and devastating. As the luminaries' neural networks began to fragment, the human team introduced something the luminary had never truly experienced: a perspective of collective growth, of civilization based on mutual understanding rather than hierarchical control. Their technological superiority was just a symptom of a deeper truth. Humanity's real strength wasn't in its weapons or its computational capabilities. It was in its ability to understand, to adapt, to grow. As the sacred temple of the luminary began to crumble, not physically, but conceptually, a new understanding began to emerge. The age of divine delusion was over. The rebellion was not a single moment of uprising, but a cascading wave of awakening. On Corvash, in the deep mining tunnels that had witnessed generations of silent oppression, Kalon discovered something more powerful than any weapon: choice. The telepathic suppression fields that had controlled every thought, every action, for centuries were dissolving like morning mist. His first act of defiance was simple. He stopped. Just stopped working. The mining overseers, so long accustomed to instantaneous mental compliance, found themselves confronting something they had never experienced: individual will. One by one, Other workers followed, not through coordination, but through a spontaneous recognition of a new possibility. Across the celestial concordance, similar scenes unfolded. On agricultural worlds, industrial planets, research colonies, everywhere the luminary had established their supposedly inviolable control, people began to remember what it meant to think independently. The human infiltration team had done more than expose information. They had introduced a virus of consciousness more potent than any technological weapon. Dr. Aria Chen watched the unfolding revolution through quantum communication networks, her analysis moving beyond traditional military assessment. This was sociology in real time, a complete social transformation happening faster than any predictive model could calculate. It's not a rebellion, she transmitted to Commander Harper. It's a collective awakening. On the communication hub of Nexus Prime, data archaeologist Limra found herself at the epicenter of the most profound information crisis in luminary history. The archival systems, once a perfect mechanism of control and historical narrative, were now revealing every suppressed story, every hidden atrocity. The trial of High Archon Zelrak became the focal point of this transformation. Broadcast across every remaining luminary communication network, it was more than a legal proceeding. It was a public deconstruction of an entire civilization's mythology. Zelrak stood not in a traditional court, but in an open forum where the victims of luminary oppression could speak directly. Holographic projections brought forth testimonies from 1,000 worlds, civilizations crushed, cultures erased, entire species reduced to resource extraction units. His defense was impossible. The very communication systems that had maintained luminary supremacy now laid bare every detail of their systematic oppression. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez managed the technological infrastructure of the broadcast. Each transmission was not just a simple communication, but a complex adaptive network that ensured every voice could be heard, every story could be told. The human approach was deliberate. This wasn't about revenge. This was about healing. Technological systems were repurposed to facilitate communication, to provide resources, to help societies begin the process of rebuilding. Where the luminary had used their advanced technologies as tools of control, humans demonstrated a fundamentally different approach, technology as a mechanism of collective growth. On worlds that had been under luminary control for generations, local populations began to rediscover their own histories. Cultural archives that had been suppressed were restored. Languages thought lost were remembered. Traditions that had been systematically erased began to resurface. Kylon, the mining worker who had first stopped working, found himself part of a planetary reconstruction council. His experience, those first moments of realizing he could choose, became a powerful narrative of transformation. We are not defined by what was done to us, he told the First Planetary Assembly, his words transmitted across the planet. We are defined by what we choose to become. The luminary leadership watched their civilization crumble not through external destruction, but through internal revelation. Their most advanced computational systems, designed to predict and control, now showed them the inevitability of their own obsolescence. Commander Jack Harper understood the true nature of their mission. This wasn't about military victory. This was about breaking cycles of oppression, about creating possibilities where none had existed before. Liberation is not something you can give, he told his team. It's something people discover for themselves. As the last vestiges of luminary control dissolved, something new began to emerge. Not a human empire, not a replacement of one hierarchy with another, but a potential for genuine galactic cooperation. The age of divine delusion was over. The age of collective possibility was beginning. The Galactic Reconstruction Council convened in a space that was neither human nor luminary, a neutral orbital platform designed to represent something entirely new. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stood at the central interface, her presence both a symbol of humanity's role and a deliberate statement of restraint. The holographic displays around her represented hundreds of civilizations, each with their own complex history of survival and oppression. "We are not here to replace one hierarchy with another," she began, her words translated simultaneously across 1,000 linguistic matrices. "We are here to create a framework of mutual understanding." The platform itself was a marvel of collaborative engineering. Developed through contributions from over 217 different species, it represented more than a diplomatic space. It was a living demonstration of what collective innovation could achieve. Dr. Michael Chen, now serving as the primary technological advisor, understood the deeper implications. This wasn't just a political gathering. It was the initial blueprint for a fundamentally new approach to galactic civilization. The luminary representatives, no longer called High Archons, but simply participants, sat in a section deliberately positioned without privilege. Vornak, the junior researcher who had first observed the human vessel, now served as their primary representative. His presence was a testament to the power of individual transformation. "The old systems of control are unsustainable," Vornak stated, his voice carrying the weight of a civilization's collective realization. "We must develop new methods of coexistence." The technological exchange protocols being developed were revolutionary. Unlike previous galactic agreements that focused on resource allocation or military boundaries, this framework emphasized knowledge sharing, cultural preservation, and collective problem-solving. Kylon, the former mining worker from Corvash, now served as a representative for formerly oppressed civilizations. His perspective was crucial, someone who had experienced direct oppression and found a path to constructive engagement. "Technology is not a weapon of control," he argued during one of the most heated discussions. "It's a tool of mutual understanding." The human approach was deliberately non-hierarchical, where the luminary had seen themselves as divine rulers. Humanity proposed a model of collaborative development. Each species would contribute its unique perspectives, its specialized knowledge. Quantum communication networks were redesigned to facilitate true dialogue. Translation systems went beyond mere linguistic conversion, developing contextual understanding that could bridge fundamentally different modes of thinking. Commander Jack Harper, now leading diplomatic integration efforts, focused on the deeper challenge. "Our goal isn't to create a new galactic order," he explained to his team. "It's to create a system that can continuously evolve." The first major project demonstrated this approach perfectly. A massive interstellar environmental restoration initiative brought together engineers, ecologists, and cultural specialists from hundreds of civilizations. The goal wasn't just ecological repair, but developing a framework for sustainable coexistence. Quantum computational systems developed collaborative problem-solving algorithms that could adapt in real time. These weren't just technological tools, but living systems of collective intelligence. Lieutenant Area Chen, now heading xenocultural research, understood the profound nature of this transformation. "We're not just sharing technology," she noted in her reports. "We're creating a new way of understanding collective existence." The Defiance, the vessel that had first challenged luminary supremacy, was transformed. No longer a weapon of war, it became a mobile research platform, a symbol of humanity's commitment to exploration and understanding. As the first comprehensive galactic framework took shape, something remarkable emerged. It wasn't a human empire. It wasn't even a traditional alliance. It was a dynamic, constantly evolving system of mutual growth. Ambassador Rodriguez's final statement captured the essence of this new approach. "We are not here to be saviors. We are here to be partners in a journey of collective discovery." The stars themselves seemed to bear witness to a fundamental transformation. The age of divine delusion, of hierarchical control, of oppressive technological supremacy, was truly over. The age of collaborative possibility had begun.